firearms users in Canada.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for South Okanagan, West Kootenay.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by saying that I'll be sharing my time today with the member from Nanaimo, Ladysmith. So I'm happy to rise here today to speak to this debate on Bill C-47, legislation that is meant to meet Canada's obligation to ratify the Arms Trade Treaty. This treaty came into force in 2014. The previous Conservative government refused to join the majority of countries around the world and sign this treaty. Indeed, it was the only government within NATO and the G7 to refuse to do so. I and my colleagues within the NDP are happy to see this government now move ahead to join most of the civilized world in acceding to the Arms Trade Treaty. So we will support sending Bill C-47 on to committee, but we have several concerns about the treaty about this bill that I hope will be fixed with amendments in committee, and I'll expand on a couple of those concerns. But I want to start off by saying that I represent a riding, South Okanagan, West Kootenay, that has a long history of pacifism. Part of that history is through the strong Doukhobor communities in parts of the West Kootenay and Boundary regions. The Doukhobors came to Canada in the early 1900s seeking a refuge to practice their belief in pacifism, living their motto of peace and toil. In the 1960s, another wave of pacifists came to southern BC in the form of American draft dodgers who left their homes and families to avoid conscription into the Vietnam War. And this history has created several key groups promoting peace in my riding, very active groups. The Boundary Peace Initiative is one, and the Kootenay Region United Nations Association is another. These groups and others like them are celebrating the International Peace Day today across Canada, and while I wish I could be with them in person in the riding, I'm happy to celebrate the day with this debate. Another peace initiative in my riding is the Mir Centre for Peace at Selkirk College in Castlegar, which provides a diploma program in peace and justice studies, as well as an international program in unarmed civilian peacekeeping. And I'm proud to represent a riding with such strong interest in peaceful solutions to world conflicts, and I'm proud to speak here today about efforts to regulate the trade in military material. And I can say that the residents of my riding are not alone in their concerns about arms trade. Polls show that the majority of Canadians don't want our country to export military equipment to countries with a history of human rights abuses. And many Canadians would be surprised to learn that our country has almost doubled its military exports in the last 10 years. That we are the second largest arms dealer to the Middle East in the world. This kind of involvement in such an explosive region makes it difficult to increase our role as a trusted peacemaker anywhere in the world. So where does Bill C-47 fall short? Well, first of all, exports from Canada to the United States will be exempt from the Export and Import Permits Act as amended by this bill. And that's contrary to the letter and the spirit of the Arms Trade Treaty, which calls for a complete and transparent coverage of all military exports. Fully half of our military exports go to the United States. And now the government has already argued that the USA is a trusted ally and we shouldn't need to regulate arms trades to our neighbors. But I see two problems with that stance. First, the USA has not ratified this arms trade treaty, so has no obligation to track trade in military products. And secondly, the present administration in the U.S., I think it's fair to say, has a very different stance on trade with a number of countries that Canada has expressed concerns with. So material and parts for military systems sold by Canadian companies to the U.S. could be incorporated into equipment there and sold anywhere in the world without tracking through the Arms Trade Treaty. And another concern we have is that important parts of our legal obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty will only be enacted through regulation. These include the legal obligation of the Minister of Foreign Affairs to assess permits using certain criteria, Unfortunately, these criteria will only be revealed through regulation after this bill receives royal consent. In other words, we here in this place will not have any role in debating those criteria. And that they could arguably be a very important part of this law. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said at the beginning, the NDP is supporting this bill at this stage. We think that any efforts to control, regulate, and monitor the export of military equipment can only be a step forward to a more peaceful world. The NDP has a strong history of supporting and promoting initiatives for peace around the world, and we were very disappointed when the Liberal government refused to take part in the recent UN negotiations toward a nuclear weapons ban treaty. The Prime Minister said in question period earlier this week that the NDP is always ready with well-meaning platitudes, or at least that's how it was translated in Hansard. I think in the verbal translation we heard here, it came out as we were ready with lovely words. But what the NDP is concerned about Bill C-47 is that it is just lovely words. It doesn't fully meet the arms trade treaty obligations. We hope that the government will seriously consider amendments at the committee stage to fix these problems so that Canada can fully live up to its agreements on the world stage and truly make the world a more peaceful place. Thank you.
Questions and comments.